neural filters, or whatever Adobe's going to call them, are, I think it's fair to say, a work in progress. This first filter is quite good, and it goes by the name Skin Smoothing. And so notice that I've gone ahead and converted this dude layer to a smart object so that I can apply the filter as an editable smart filter. And now I'll go out to the filter menu and choose neural filters, or whatever command you see at this location. All right, that's going to bring up this big workspace, and assuming that the featured filters are selected, then go ahead and click on Skin Smoothing and toggle it on as well. At which point, I want you to notice that we get a much smoother result. And so, just for the sake of comparison here, this is before, and you can preview your changes, by the way, by clicking on this Preview Changes icon down here. So this is the before view of the image, which features comparatively modeled skin, and this is the after version, so much smoother indeed. And by the way, this is even true, you get a lot of smoothness even if you take your blur value down to 0. So notice at this point, both the blur and smoothness values, that's all you have, are set to 0. And even still, if I were to turn off the preview checkbox, you can see that his skin was much more modeled. So this is the before view, and this is after. So even setting both values to 0 does something. And actually, it smooths things up quite a bit. Another thing I want you to notice about preview, I'll go ahead and turn it off. So notice it's not highlighted. However, if I were to crank up the blur value, then that's not only going to change the preview of the image over here on the left-hand side of the screen, but it's going to turn preview changes back on. All right, so just for the sake of demonstration, I'm going to crank the smoothness value up to its maximum of 50. As things stand now, you can take that value down to -50 as well. So you have a lot of room to play around. Anyway, I'm going to crank this value up. I'll go ahead and take the blur value up to 70, let's say, and then notice that I'm going to output to the smart filter, to an editable smart filter, by the way. And if you're curious, you may want to check this guy out, duplicate layer mask on your own. But I'm just going to go with smart filter and click OK. And what that does is it goes ahead and creates a new neural filters container right here. And so if I want to modify the effect, all I need to do is double click on neural filters, and that will bring back those settings as we're seeing here. At which point I'm going to go ahead and crank the blur value up to 100. Am I satisfied with the results? Yes, I am. At which point I'll click OK in order to apply that change. And just for the sake of demonstration here, I'll turn off the smart filters. There's the original version of the photograph. And then if I press Ctrl-Z, Command-Z on the Mac to undo the turning off of the smart filters, there is the much smoother portrait, thanks to the impressive power of the new skin smoothing filter here inside Photoshop 2021. In keeping with Adobe's recent tradition of creating AI technology, at least where software is concerned, some of the neural filters, if indeed they continue to be called that, can identify individual faces. So here we are looking at a photograph of 3 faces, you may note, from the Dreamtime image library. And notice here inside the layers panel that I've converted this layer to a smart object in advance so we can apply the neural filter as an editable smart filter. And so I'll go up to the filter menu and choose whatever command exists at this location in the menu, neural filters in my case. And notice, if I zoom out a little bit here, that we have this blue rectangle surrounding this left guy's face. So at least in the case of skin smoothing, Photoshop can identify individual faces. All right, so I'm going to unhover over that option right there. And notice we're seeing a dimmed version of this guy. And that's because the filter is not currently turned on. So I'll go ahead and click on this toggle icon right there. And notice we are seeing a thumbnail of this fellow. And so let's say I decide to crank the blur value up to 100% so that we're blurring him as much as possible. Notice that his friend right next door here is not nearly as blurred. Now, perhaps once the product ships, you'll be able to just click on her face in order to select her. In my case, that's not an option. So what I have to do is click on this little thumbnail and choose her from this menu. at which point I see the same blur value that I just applied. I have a feeling that this feature is not baked, so I'm just going to go ahead and change the blur value to 50%. So in other words, it's not really giving me the results I would expect at this point. In your case, it may be all better. I'm going to go ahead and spacebar drag in order to scroll the image so the familiar zooming and scrolling options work inside this workspace, at which point I'll go ahead and select the final person in this trio. Again, I'm seeing the last values I applied. I don't think that's particularly accurate. In fact, that would defeat the purpose of being able to select different people, at which point I'll just go ahead and apply a completely different smoothness value this time around, and then I'll go ahead and click OK in order to accept that change, and I have now modified these three people independently of each other. Now notice a very obvious problem in this very late version in the beta cycle here, and that is that we're seeing a kind of edge between the individual people. If you experience that, by the way, all you have to do is select the filter mask by clicking on this little white icon right here inside the layers panel, and then what you want to do is select the brush tool, which you can get by pressing the B key, and right click inside the image window and then change the size value to something like 200 pixels. A hardness value of 0% is exactly what we want. And then I'll make sure my foreground color is set to black. It's very important for what I'm doing right now. And then, my cursor isn't nearly big enough, so I'll press the right bracket key a few times in order to increase the size of my brush, and then I'll just go ahead and paint around this region in order to get rid of those weird gray edges. Again, I'm very hopeful that this problem will not exist when you're using the software, but in any event, despite how Photoshop 2021 may behave, you're going to be able to identify individual faces using the skin smoothing filter. All right, now you and I are going to take a look at another new filter inside Photoshop 2021 known as Style Transfer. And this one is altogether special effects. And so notice here inside the Layers panel, I have a smart object as indicated by this little page icon in the bottom right corner. I've also assigned an editable smart filter in the form of what is currently called the neural filters. And so if you want to assign another neural filter, because there's a bunch of them, then you can either go up to the filter menu and choose whatever command exists at this location, or you can just go ahead and double click on this item right here in order to bring up this dedicated workspace. Now notice that I'm seeing the applied filters. So could be more than one. In my case, it's just skin smoothing. What I'm going to do is click on the featured filters icon right here. And again, I really want to emphasize this could all change. But in any event, at this moment in time, I see this item called Style Transfer. And notice it's showing me a kind of filter gallery style effect. I'm going to go ahead and turn on this toggle right here. You may be invited to download the filter. And notice if I click on Show More, that I'm seeing all kinds of different, not really styles, but different artists. Like this is a Van Gogh, and so is this, and this, and this. That's obviously Starry Night. And down here is Night Cafe. Here's Gauguin. Here's Degas. Here is Katsushika Hokusai with the Great Wave of Katagawa, which is one of his 36 views of Mount Fuji, as you may know. In our case, if I click on it, it just creates kind of a bunch of little tiny waves in this guy's face. All right, in any event, I'm going to click way down here on Show Less so that I can click on this cubism thumbnail. I'm sure it's a specific piece of art. I have no idea what it is, however. You may know, and you can tell me if you like. Now, notice that we have this pretty compelling effect over here inside the preview region. It's got some vertical lines that may or may not show up when you apply this filter. I'm going to turn on the preserve color checkbox so that we lose some of these highly saturated colors. Now, if I press Control minus or Command minus to back off a little bit, notice if I turn on focus subject, it's kind of moving around on me, that a moment or two later, I'm going to see some additional focus on the subject of the photograph. So I'm going to stick with the idea that these options may vary when you use the software. You can definitely adjust the style strength. And when I say definitely, I have no idea if that option is going to stay there or not. You can blur the background. I don't really find this to be a good effect. Part of the problem is that we have a halo around the subject. So I'm going to go ahead and turn this checkbox off. You can mess around with this filter as much as you like. I'm sure you could spend an entire day on it. I'm going to go ahead and click OK in order to apply that filter. And then I'll press Shift F to switch to the full screen mode, and I'll go ahead and zoom on in as well. And that is at least one conceivable way that you might apply the style transfer filter as an editable smart filter here inside Photoshop 2021. All right, now we'll see how you can turn on and off your applied neural filters. And so notice that I'm working with a smart object here inside the layers panel, as indicated by this little page icon, and that I'm seeing neural filters assigned as an editable smart filter, which means that I can change those filter settings anytime that I like, just by double clicking on this item right here, which is going to bring up this workspace. And at this point, you can see that applied filters is selected and that I have assigned two filters, skin smoothing and style transfer. If I like, I can change the settings for either of these filters. So I could go ahead and click on Show More in the case of style transfer here and scroll down to this Degas thumbnail and assign that to this guy. Now, these are fairly complicated operations, so it may take a moment or two to apply. And then I can either click OK if I want to assign this filter, or I could just turn off either of these items. And so I'm going to turn off skin smoothing in order to disable that first filter. And I'm going to switch to this Gauguin thumbnail just because I'm very curious to see what it looks like. It doesn't look like much at all, actually. So I think I'll go ahead and scroll down this list right here and turn off preserve color, that checkbox. And that looks the way it does, at which point I'll click OK in order to assign that filter. And so once you've assigned one or more neural filters as smart filters to a smart object, then you can modify them, including turning them on or off as much as you like. I just know there's somebody out there who's thinking, I hate it when Dean makes fun of Adobe products. In which case, please write us and let us know. But in any event, we're going to switch to this photograph, which we've seen before. I've gone ahead and converted this image to a smart object so that I can apply a smart filter to it. Namely, we're going to see the first of the beta filters, at least the way things stand now, which is called Smart Portrait. And this one is absolutely wonderful. I'm going to go up to the filter menu and choose Neural Filters. Again, that's what it's called now. Once you get your hands on the software, it might be called something different. I'm going to skip over skin smoothing and the incredibly successful style transfer to this beaker right here, which indicates the beta filters. And you'll see little cloud icons next to the ones that you still have to download. In my case, I've already downloaded Smart Portrait, so I'm going to go ahead and turn it on. Check out that thumbnail right there. It's capable of making a person look cool, which is probably the best feature where this filter is concerned. So I'll go ahead and turn it on, and I'll let you explore things like joy, surprise, and anger. I'm going to turn on facial age, and I want you to notice this item up here. This filter processes image data in the cloud. Again, that's the way it is now, which means that it's going to have to upload and download the image in order to apply the effect. And so you are going to have a live internet connection. I'm going to go ahead and crank down the facial age to -40, and you can see that it's working on it. We've got this little spinning item right here, and so it may take quite a while to apply this filter. And so it's going to depend on the server, of course, as well as your internet connection. But notice that this guy has unaged quite successfully. So if I were to turn off this preview item right here, we can see the original version of the photograph from the Dreamstime image library once again. And now I'll turn it back on. Oh, he's so much younger. It works even better if you decide to crank up his age. So now, I don't know if this value of 50 means he's now 50 years old, but he is definitely aged. And his beard has gone off course a little bit, at which point you should definitely play with these other options right here. Have a blast. I'm going to go ahead and crank up the feathering value. I think that's going to soften the edges. Yes, indeed. At which point I'll click OK in order to create my much older version of that Dreamstime photograph. And that is at least one way to apply the Smart Portrait filter here inside the groundbreaking Photoshop 2021.